If you want to understand what kind of King William is likely to be, you don't need to guess. He's already running one of the 2 crown estates in England. And for almost 4 years now, he's been showing his hand, quietly, through spreadsheets and investment reports rather than speeches, about exactly the kind of institution he wants to build. This is the part of the story that tends to get buried under royal gossip, which is a shame, because it's the most concrete evidence available anywhere of William's priorities as a future monarch. Not palace whispers. Not unnamed sources describing his mood in a meeting. Actual financial reports, actual investment plans, actual interviews, where he describes his own thinking in his own words. Let's walk through what he's actually built, and what it tells us about where this is all heading. When Charles became king in September 2022, William didn't just become Prince of Wales. He also inherited the Duchy of Cornwall, a private estate created by Edward III in 1337, specifically to give the heir to the throne financial independence. It's a sprawling operation. Roughly 130,000 acres of land, farms, and property spread across more than 20 counties in England, plus holdings on the Isles of Scilly, all managed separately from the Crown Estate and from William's personal wealth. The duchy isn't small money. For the 2024 to 2025 financial year, it generated a distributable surplus of £22.9 million, translating to roughly $30.9 million that William draws on to fund what the duchy's own materials describe as his public, charitable, and private activities. He isn't required to pay tax on it, but he voluntarily does. And there are limits on what he can do with it. He doesn't own the underlying capital assets and can't personally profit from selling them. And any property transaction above £500,000 needs Treasury sign-off. That structure matters because it means everything William has done with the duchy since 2022 has happened within fairly tight institutional guardrails. He hasn't been able to simply do whatever he wants with it. And what he's chosen to do within those limits tells you a lot. Since taking over the estate, William has made a habit of visiting different parts of it roughly once every 4 to 6 weeks, trips the Telegraph has referred to as Duchy Days. These visits are typically low-key, rarely showing up in the official court circular, working through farms and regional offices to meet staff and tenants directly rather than staging a formal royal engagement. People who work with him on the estate describe a leadership style that's notably hands-on. Duchy Secretary Will Bax told the Telegraph that William is demanding in a productive sense, driven by genuine conviction and a visible desire to have a real impact. Estate Director Ben Murphy used a similar description, characterizing William's approach as an impatience inherited from his father that pushes the whole operation to move faster. William himself has described the duchy less as a real estate portfolio and more as an extension of his philanthropic work. He said he sees it as another branch of the same mission that drives the Royal Foundation, focused on doing good in rural communities specifically. The clearest evidence of where William wants to take this arrived in 2026, and it's genuinely striking in scope. According to reporting first published by The Times and Duchy Chief Executive Will Bax, William intends to sell off roughly a fifth of the Duchy of Cornwall's holdings over the next decade, redirecting an estimated £500 million into tackling Britain's housing shortage and environmental restoration. Bax summarized the thinking behind the shift by saying the duchy shouldn't exist simply to own land. Its purpose, in William's view, should be to have a measurable positive impact. The duchy's own 2026 Integrated Impact Report, covering the financial year that closed in March, backs this up with real numbers rather than just rhetoric. It lays out a $630 million investment plan for the coming decade. Plans to build 2,500 new homes, with 900 of them designated affordable, a 20-year restoration vision for the Dartmoor landscape, ongoing peatland recovery work, and expansion of duchy-managed Atlantic rainforest. On the Isles of Scilly, the report describes a $3.7 million investment, and in the Nanselden development, more than $24 million has gone into a Market Street project that's already created over 100 jobs. One of the duchy's farms, Treguddon, has reportedly become its first to hit net zero emissions. This is not a small, symbolic gesture. Selling off a fifth of an estate that's existed in roughly its current form since the 14th century is, by any reasonable measure, a genuinely significant break from how the duchy has traditionally operated. And it's happening under William's direct authority, years before he's anywhere near the throne. Unsurprisingly, the plan hasn't landed without friction. It's drawn support from housing and environmental reform advocates, but also real pushback from hereditary landowners who see the duchy's traditional purpose, preserving land and income for the crown, being reshaped into something closer to a philanthropic investment vehicle. There have also been legitimate questions raised about tenant welfare and rent levels on duchy-owned farmland in Cornwall and Devon, since a large landowner shifting its whole strategy inevitably affects the people who actually live and work on that land. Here's why all of this matters beyond the duchy itself. It's the closest thing available to a live pilot program for how William intends to run the monarchy once the full weight of the institution is his. The pattern is consistent across everything he's touched. At the Royal Foundation, the charitable organization he runs with Kate, the emphasis has always been on structure. A chief executive, published annual accounts, defined goals, and a willingness to cut programs that don't produce results. At the duchy, the same instincts show up again. Measurable outcomes, published impact reports, a willingness to divest from the traditional model in favor of one with clearer social returns. None of this is subtle if you're paying attention. William isn't just inheriting institutions and running them the way his father or grandmother did. He's applying something closer to a modern operating model, one built around accountability, published results, and a stated preference for institutions that justify their own existence through impact rather than traditional own. That same instinct has reportedly extended to how he thinks about the monarchy's broader structure. Coverage around this year's Trooping the Color described proposals attributed to William that would strip formal titles from family members who aren't full-time working royals, tighten rules preventing relatives from living in royal accommodation rent-free or subletting it, and reduce palace staffing substantially. He's also been described as wanting fewer, more purposeful public engagements rather than a packed calendar of ceremonial appearances, along with a shift toward digital communication and away from tradition he reportedly views as more theatrical than functional. It's worth noting the pushback on this framing too. Royal biographer Robert Hardman has said Charles never actually wanted a dramatically smaller monarchy, which complicates the popular narrative that William is single-handedly demolishing his father's approach. The more accurate picture is probably that Charles and William share a broad direction, a more focused, accountable institution, while differing on how aggressively and how fast to get there. William's demanding reputation isn't limited to his professional role. His own children are being introduced to royal life at a deliberately measured pace, which itself reflects a broader philosophy about how he wants the next generation to experience the institution. Prince George, now 12, has taken on a handful of significant public appearances, including joining his parents at a VE Day 80th anniversary tea party with veterans at Buckingham Palace. But royal biographer Ingrid Seward has described William's approach to George's rollout as deliberately gradual, giving him, in Seward's words, a taste of royal duty rather than the full experience all at once, with a clear intention of not raising George the way William himself was raised in the aftermath of his mother's death. That detail matters more than it might seem to at first. William's management style, measured, structured, allergic to unnecessary exposure, shows up in how he runs a billion-pound estate, and it shows up in how he's raising his own son to eventually take on the same role. It's the same person applying the same instincts at every scale available to him. Put all of this together, and a fairly coherent picture emerges, even without a single dramatic scandal to hang it on. King Charles is managing a serious, still undisclosed illness while trying to keep the monarchy's day-to-day functions running. His son has spent the last 4 years quietly building, and in some cases actively reforming, every institution that's fallen under his control, from a centuries-old land estate to a modern charitable foundation, consistently pushing each one toward more transparency, measurable outcomes, and less deference to how things have always been done. Kate, having come through her own cancer treatment, has stepped into an expanded role that goes well past the traditional boundaries of consort duties, formalized further by the new royal warrant authority she now shares with William. Meanwhile, the working family itself has narrowed considerably, Andrew's scandal, Harry's estrangement, and a general contraction toward a smaller, more tightly managed core group of senior royals. None of it required an invented yacht trip or a secret holding company to be worth paying attention to. The actual documented version of this story is a family navigating serious illness, while one member, the one next in line, has spent years demonstrating, through real financial reports and real interviews, exactly what kind of institution he intends to hand down when his own time eventually comes. Whether that vision survives fully intact once he's the one making every final call, without his father's counterbalance in the room, is the genuinely open question here, and it's one nobody, including William himself, has had to answer yet.